Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and perhaps even, or most definitely, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this exciting rendering with depth and particle effects with another exciting episode of In the Studio with Daz 3D. Wonderful to see you, so many of you here. My moderators today are Miss Julia, of course, Mr. Nate and Mr. Brian. They are responsible for putting links in, putting the ban hammer on people, and also taking your questions. No question is too small, no question is too big. If I can answer it, I totally attempt to do so. It is so great to see you. Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. The temperatures are not amazing. I have to say, yes, as I said, my mom in Bremen, she had 50 degrees centigrade. That is like, what is that? Like, that's like 200 in Fahrenheit? No, probably not, but it's definitely over 100. And in Bremen, as far as I'm concerned, nobody has air conditioning units. So it's one of those things. Poor Europe and River Danube. I will totally look that up. Thank you so much for the tip. I haven't seen any footage there, but it's one of those things. Something is certainly changing, and it's not only that. It's also the issue with gas and oil prices right now, which is seriously affecting customers. So again, what my mom was saying in Germany, gas prices are probably going to double, and they're going to stay that way. So crazy stuff. Let me show you what we're going to do today. First of all, a little bit of music perhaps. There we go. Always good to have music. Today is all about particle effects as well as just some render effects, stuff you can do at render time. So often effects are applied at the post-production stage because it's often easier to do this, but we can employ some simple tricks that are really easy on the GPU when it comes to rendering cool stuff. Let me show you some of the bits and pieces that I've prepared here. This is a render I've made the other week. That is from, this is the Flash, the superhero, and this is something that is done in post-production. So this is something where I rendered the figure out on a transparent background and did the whole thing in Photoshop. And there's value in that because it means you don't have to redo your renders. If you have something that you change your mind, or you think, hey, that background isn't working for me, maybe I want it to be red or I want it to be purple, it's really easy to do that in Photoshop or in any other 2D post-production package, and then just go and replace it without having to re-render the image. It's really, really fast to do that. But I thought it was a little plain, so I changed my mind and did something like this. So I wanted to have a full shot of the figure, and while it is the same pose and the same lighting as you can see here on the figure, this is not done in Photoshop. This was done inside Daz Studio with a product that we're going to talk about, actually with a couple of products. So one is just the rubble here in the front, and the background here, that's not actual fire, those are just planes on which we have drawn on a fire, and then it kind of emits the light. And I think I've also had a couple of lights in here to just to give the guy a little bit of separation. And then on top of that, we have these nice little sparkly effects here, and those are typically done with particles. Again, like in 3D, there's usually more than one way to do this, so that's something that you can do it in a couple of ways, and I'll show you. In fact, I think I'll show you 3 ways of how to get this done. But the point of this is not a whole set. These are just elements here. This is a rubble element here in the background, then there's another rubble element here, and then there's 2 or 3 fire planes in the background. Do I have a shot of that? Yeah, look at that. This is actually what it looks like inside Daz Studio. So we have the camera here, and it frames up our guy, and then we have these 3 flame planes here, and in the background we have a HDRI, and we have a particle thing. There's also one flame curtain at the back here, so it's not a full scene, but it's a nice effect inside, directly inside of Daz Studio. Let me show you something else. This one is basically his friend here, the Spider-Man. And I've done something similar. This is also fairly easy. This is the 1920s set, and he's basically just jumping from house to house, and I've added some cars in here, but once again, without the sparkly particle effects here, this wouldn't look so good. I wasn't quite happy with the framing, so I did this, and this was a bit of a convoluted lighting setup to separate him out, but everything else was done in so basically everything was done in Daz Studio, and that is kind of cool, and I like that. There's merit in that. So there's really these 2 approaches. If you do too much in Daz Studio, or you do the wrong thing too much in Daz Studio, then you're going to be penalized with a huge render time, and that's kind of true for every 3D application. But if you do the right things, then your render time is minimally impacted, and you want to have the quickest render time and the best outcome, and have the best for each situation essentially. That's the Photoshop stack. So it just all comes out of Daz Studio here. This is what it looks like. And I think we have another shot from here. Yeah, you can just about see these particles here, and they're just planes scattered around, slightly resized with originally was something called ultra scatter, but I've used Matty's product for this, so I'll introduce you to that a little bit later on. I also had to do some adjustments here in Blender. The outfit wasn't quite working. I think that's all I have from Spider-Man here. Another one I can share with you is in fact a little kind of mini post-mortem of the thumbnail of this stream. So this is done in the same way, and we'll build something similar to this, maybe not quite as much as that, but this is using another interesting trick. So it's the particle effects. Once again, we have those. Then we have obviously our tree giant here, wonderful figure by Joe Quick. We've got a little bit of a fire plane here in the background, but other than that, it's not a whole set. It's just we have one grass bushel here, we have a very boring plane, we've got some bones here that are a little bit out of focus. We're kind of hinting at the fact that this might be a graveyard, but also we have something in the background here, and it almost doesn't matter what it is, but we see, hey, this is a horizon and there's probably trees. We might be somewhere in the forest, and it's kind of dark at night because we have that dark blue background here. So this was done with all just individual elements, namely here these gravestones here and grass bushels, and once again the plane here. And can we see it? The particle volume, just about. It really is emphasized by the fact that we're focusing on, like, say, his eyes, and then we're throwing the rest, background and foreground, out of focus, and that creates this what I like to call the bokeh effect. I think the proper pronunciation for that is, I think, bokeh, which sounds a bit like gang language, so I don't really pronounce it that way, but hey, I don't really know what's right or what's wrong. So another interesting fact is the background here, and this is made with a product by Kindred Arts and Ravenlaw called the Parallax backgrounds. This is really what the outside looks like. So this is a concept from that video games often use when you have kind of your level inside here, but let's say you had a few streets that essentially end in basically somewhere where you can't go. But if you look out into the distance, you don't want to have geometry out there because that's heavy on the whole engine. So what people usually do is they build these 1 or 2, sometimes 3 concentric circles onto which you project a transparent image. And if you throw this out of focus, or if you have it very much in the background, then it's a really nice and easy trick to put something in the background and fill in the gaps. And this is just released, this product, I think a couple of weeks ago. And I thought I'm going to show you how to use all these things, and how you can make funky scenes with that. Is that all? I think that is all. Oh no, one other thing that we're also going to look at is once more for particles. There are products that you can buy to help you do this, but you can also create these particles from scratch, and I'll show you how to do this as well. This is something that I've done a while ago, and I don't actually have a clean image for this. It has my logo in it. I do apologize for that. But yeah, this is all done inside Daz Studio with this effect. I don't know why he's so shiny. One of those things. Hitoshi HD. So this is essentially an identical image, and the stuff going on in the background is just little platelets here as a big cube. And the fact that this looks quite funky is the fact that it's just thrown out of focus. So I'll show you how to set all these things up. And I hope we're going to have fun doing that. As a little thank you for being a good viewer and all that, we have exciting stuff. We have the Tree Giant Mega Bundle that is currently on sale. I'm showing it here as under 30 bucks. There's a huge amount of value in there. I believe there's also the Forest Witch bundle is available, and you get 60% off, I believe, a whole category, which is where these effects are in. I've kind of forgotten what it's called. Let's see, is it I think the Daz website tells me. There we go. Select resources and add-ons. That's the category to check out, and today you get a big discount, I think all over the weekend, so do some shopping. It's really nice. So one of these products that's in here, aside from the wonderful Tree Giant here for Genesis 8.1 male by Joe Quick, by the way, he makes these wonderful figures. That this is a kind of a texture pack for the Tree Giant. Can't believe that's built on Genesis 8.1. It's crazy, isn't it? Thank you, Brian, for the links. I appreciate that. All sweet stuff as usual. Absolutely, Tug. I will try and keep an eye on the chat. So if you do have any questions, then do pop them in the chat. If I don't spot them, our moderators were going to fish them out, and at the end I'll take some time for questions. You did yours last night. Excellent. Excellent, Daniel. Very good. And here we see these particle effects as well. So a really good bundle to do to get. You get some pretty ladies here, and of course you also get a character by Mr. Colm Jackson. I remember when we did a co-stream together for the Daz Plus series, the Pro Artist series. I think this character here was his background picture. It's kind of nice to see her in the bundle as well. And he showed us how to get color corrections done with LUTs and all kinds of other funky effects like the camera raw and stuff. If you haven't seen it, catch up on it. If you're a Daz Plus subscriber, you can catch up on all our Daz Plus streams. They're kind of they're 2 weeks in between the public ones. There's another live stream that I do usually with a guest, and Colm was showing us how to make a picture like that. So this is the product. I mean, this is also by Kindred Arts, and this is these are the forest effects. So we get ideas of how to make these particles. We also get some fog that we can easily create, and we can do that all inside Daz Studio. Very, very cool bundle to pick up. So the product that I've used, and you can basically we're gonna have a look at both of these, is by Matty Manx. Actually, can I see that here? Matty Manx, Fire and Smoke for iRay. Let's see if I can bring it up. And Brian, if you can fish that out, I think there's a couple. There's MFX Fire and Smoke 2 and Fire and Smoke 1. And this is the one that I've used for the image on the thumbnail here. So it comes with these fire planes, and it comes with one possibility of how you can make these firefly effects here. So very cool product. This is it. Let me show you how it works and how to actually use that. Let's go and bring in my tree giant first. We have so many pretty ladies. I like figures like this. It's very, very cool. To have something so different. Joe Quick, I believe he also made the snowman. Also a big, big favorite of mine. Very nice. This is what he looks like with the scary hands and all that. And let me see if we can give him some there's some materials here. No, actually that's an expansion, isn't it? He has a tree giant expansion here. Oh yeah, he has some burning effects and all that. But I think there was another expansion pack that gave him some different materials. I don't know if I've installed it or not. I may not have. We're going to leave him as he is. Let's go and see if we can find a pose for him. I think this is the one I've used, but we can use any pose. Let's just go through a few and see which one we fancy. That is cool. I like that already. These poses are so different than normal character poses because he's just such a different figure. Another really cool artist that makes things that are not like the Genesis figure at all is Alessandro. I really like his anthropomorphic hippo. Look at that, very cool. Very, very cool. So many exciting poses. Let's say we stick with this one here. Spectating, it's called. I like it. Let's have him spectate. I'll go and set up a camera. That's kind of important because we need to have that depth of field effect. So I'll go and just step back a little bit and just go create myself a camera from the viewport here. New camera, copy perspective view, like so. And then we have the camera. Show my aspect frame here. Let's say we're using a square. And then with my camera selected, I'll head over here to the parameters tab, onto camera, and I'm going to go and use a longer focal length, because the longer your focal length is, the shallower your depth of field gets, and that makes these particle effects more pronounced. So instead of the default 65, I'll go and do something longer. 120 is going to do fine. 200 is also good. Let's say I'll use 200, and I'll dolly out, and then maybe this is kind of a nice close up here where he's watching something like that. Just give him a bit of negative space on the other side. Yeah, maybe that's my framing here on the camera. I'll go back to the perspective view. I don't think I need the aspect frame anymore. If you wanted to see both the camera and the man, you can select both of these things and hit Control F. Then you frame up one or multiple objects if you wanted to do that. If I select the tree giant here and then hit Control F, then he's basically focused. Or if I wanted to do that just for the camera, Control F here, that's my camera. Or I just select both of these, Control F, and then I'll see both of these guys. So I'll set up the depth of field in a moment. So now we can't see anything because by default the cameras don't render depth of field. Let me go and bring in the particle thing now, or we could just look at it. Let me just actually look at it with the default light, just see what it looks like right now. Just like this with iRay. This is the default HDRI that we have inside Daz Studio, and you know, it's default. This is what it looks like. It's cool. So default lighting. Let's go and switch back to here and bring in the Matty Manx particles now, and that is, I believe that is under, if I can only remember, it wasn't utilities, was it environments? I might just go and search for MMX. It could be, I'll just search all products. There we go, there it is. We know for sure it's under props. There we go. Props. So this is the product. So, and this is the fire curtain here. These are several things that a person can hold, or kind of, you know, fire sparks. These two things here, the FS Ember Large and Ember Small Scatter, those are, if I double click that, comes in at the center of the scene. Those are these constructs here. And if I go into Control F, I'll see a very large kind of container, if you will. It's just an invisible cube that's a little bit flat, inside of which, if you open this up, you can see that we have one thing, which is the actual object here. If I go and Control F into that, then I can see that this is what the actual particle looks like, and it's just a plane. So this is really easy on the geometry, and it's just, you know, it's 4 vertices, that's all it is, with a transparency map and an emissive texture on that. And then Matty's gone ahead and scattered this around into multiple instances with a tool called Ultra Scatter, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. But what the outcome of that is that we have these things here, so basically instances of this one plane dotted around inside this this invisible container, and they're scaled in, they're kind of rotated and scaled slightly randomly. And if you watch closely, you can kind of see them passing by in front of your camera. So that's what they look like, and they come in the center of the scene, and as I said, it's fairly large. It encompasses quite a large area here, and that's kind of cool. So if I go back to my camera, I can see them kind of dotted around here, so they're there, that's good. But if I go and switch this over to iRay, I'll see that they're not all that visible, or then they don't really look that good out of the box. They look like this, and the reason for that is that there's no depth of field on the scene right now. So if we had the particles that are further away more out of focus, then they kind of become all blurry. And that's kind of the trick to creating these particles. So you can see some are in the front of my figure, some are at the back here. And if I go over to my camera here, and then head over to parameters, head over to my camera, then I can go and switch on the depth of field setting here. That's kind of part one of the mysterious puzzle of how to get depth of field going. So you have to tell the camera that you want to render with depth of field. iRay knows it already. You don't have to do anything on the render settings, just, you know, hit it on, and then it is enabled. But the focal plane as to what is supposed to be in focus, that is not set. So I can see my tree giant is now kind of, the focus is here and it's not really on his eye, so that's really why we want it. So that needs to be adjusted with this thing here, the focal distance. Let me just go and switch back to, in fact, let me go switch to a dual top and bottom kind of screen setup here, and that means I can now go and see my rendered scene at the top. You can also use the aux viewport for that, and at the bottom here I'm going to go and go play. So I'll select my camera and my subject here, tree giant, and then I'll go and hit either this square icon here, that is the same as Control F, or you just hit Control F, and that shows you where that is. This shows you the camera and the tree giant, and also now that we've enabled depth of field, where that focal plane is. And it's kind of here. So that's really what we see. This is the bit that's in focus. We really need to bring that forward a bit. And you can either do that by grabbing a hold of this little ball here that you can sometimes see, or what I tend to do is just adjust this value here, the focal distance. As you do that, you can see that this whole gap here moves, and we need to kind of move that so that in theory everything in between these two planes should now be in focus, but because it's kind of emulating the real world, only really the thing where the green line is, that's really in focus if you have a really shallow depth of field. And then as you go away from that line, things are starting to blur out, and the further you get away, the more blurred out it is. So if I were to, so now his face is more or less in focus here. But if I go and make my f-stop, if I play with this f-stop value here, then you'll see that the gap changes. As I make this value smaller, the depth of field becomes shallower. And technically on film, that is because the aperture, which is what we're kind of playing with, becomes larger, and that means the amount of focus stuff that is being put on the sensor, on the film, is less and less. And if I make that smaller, which is larger values, inverse something kind of a law, then I get more depth of field. So the effect that we get on our particles is if I go and turn this from the default 22 to something like 11, something that larger, I get a larger depth of field particles, and I also get a shallower depth of field here. Let's see that again. This is the default, this is the gap here, and if I go and put this to something even smaller like 4, then I can see that this gap that is now rendered in focus is getting even shallower here. And as a result, also the particles are getting smaller and smaller, or like blurred out, more blurred out, and you can barely see them now. So 4 is probably not the right value here. Yeah, they're almost disappeared now. So maybe 8 or 11. Yeah, now you can see them creeping in here. Does that make sense so far? Oops, 114 is obviously not what I meant. But yeah, 22 is a 16 we can try. But you can just go and play with this slider and see when you find the effect that you like. We'll talk about the color and also the amount of particles that you have. So you can also go ahead now and just take this whole container here and move that around. So this is the whole container of particles. You can say the rotation, if you Y rotate this, then you see that all these particles move. So if you think they're not quite in the right position and something is on his eye or whatever, or there's not quite enough of them, you can rotate them. You can also scale this whole thing down if you want to do that. So if it's too large and if you like to see more particles, maybe a 50% scale makes the whole thing smaller. And now we have this effect that I was just talking about. We probably don't want this, so like a Y rotation, just to move these guys around. Or maybe you find something that you particularly enjoy, so it's also possible. So that's in essence how you do that. I'll show you in a second how you could change the color of these, and also how you could create them yourself, and I'll also show you a completely different approach to this. Yes, Tug, that's a possibility. You can just rotate the container. In fact, let's just quickly do that. That is a really easy thing to do. So if we say 120 frames as an animation, and we'll say the Y rotation is on 0 right now on the first frame, and then I'll go on to maybe the last frame here, and then I'll put the Y rotation maybe not on something like drastically fast, so we probably don't want to rotate it 360 degrees, but maybe we'll go with 120. Well, not 120, sorry, let's go with 90, so we have that nice and slow. So iRay isn't going to play ball when I play that back, but you can see the effect is this is already too fast, isn't it? So we want something much slower. So maybe we'll go and say something like 30. And we probably also, if you wanted to animate this, you probably also want to go and grab these 2 keyframes here, and then you go set keyframe interpolation to linear, and then you should see something like this. Yeah, it's not going to work in iRay in real time, but you get the picture. So yeah, very good idea. So you can have little little firefly animations that just keep going around. So they're very cool. Hey, Mr. Chris, good to see you. Yes, very good idea. So particles this way, that's one way of doing it, but that is not the only way that we can do it. Actually, oh yeah, let me close this down again and show you some of the things that Matty's put in here. So I'm going to go and select the kind of the real particle here, none of the instances, just the real geometry here, and I'll head over to surfaces. It only has one material here, which is the FS emitter, and this is where you can play with values. So maybe you want to go and crank up or down the emission. That would be here. So if you think the particles glow a little bit too much and you want them a little bit darker, you can play with that. That's possible. Or you can also change the color if you don't want them to have this color. If you'd like this overlaid with something else, if you'd like, if you prefer like dark red particles, you can do that. It takes a little bit of time, but yeah, there we go. That is fairly easy. I think he has also got, there are some material presets that you can put on here. Let's have a look. I think it's under shaders. I thought I did with under materials even. Duh. Was it somewhere? There's several things for the flame here. These are the particles here. Are they? I think. No, they're not. Particles. Do we have any for the particles? Different types of embers. See, these are the ones that we have, I think. So now they take on a different shape and a different color. So this is made up of a diffuse texture, of a transparency texture, and also of an emissive texture. That's how these effects basically are born. Let's stick with the tree giant and with our framing. I'll go switch this back over to filament. I'll go and delete this out for now, and I'll show you another way of making these particles with the product that comes with the bundle here, which was, have I still got it? Somewheres, which is this one here, KA Forest Effects. So we'll talk about fire in a minute, just to finish off the particle thing here. So this one is by Kindred Arts. It's a Daz original, and it's part of the bundle that we get. And this implements the particles slightly differently. So these are not available as one main thing and kind of a volume of instances. This one is now, where was it? There we go. Forest Effects. These are also props here. These are kind of made for fireflies here. So if I go and load this in, watch what happens. It looks like a full solid object here. And if I go and leave my camera untouched here, if I look at this, it looks pretty much the same way, and it's essentially the idea, but we don't get access to the instances. This is just one solid volume here. So it's almost like a VDB volume, but not loading a VDB as such. But yeah, if you look closely, you can see that those particles are now scattered inside that volume. So this is a full thing here, but the principle applies also that you can go to the surfaces here and then just go and change attributes about it here on this one surface that it has. If I go and switch this back over to Iray, then we can see that the effect is a little different, but this is just the way it's made is slightly different. So also this is actually shaped like a little moth. So that's kind of cool. But the same laws of physics apply. If I wanted to add some more depth of field to my camera here, I can do that. Easy, quick way if you think, hey, I like the distribution of these, but I'd just like a few more. You can just go and duplicate the whole thing. Edit, duplicate, node. Now they're in the exact same position. So to get a little bit of variation in there, you just take your second volume and just go either scale it up or down, rotate it a little bit. Like, you know, if you do that, and you can see that this is now kind of multiplying in the same space here. If I go and rotate this around by, it doesn't have to be much, 20 is probably enough. And then you have more particles and all of a sudden more variation in there, which is kind of cool, really neat. And then again, if you wanted to have that blurred out a little bit more, camera, and then you head over to the f-stop here, and as long as your focal plane is in the correct spot, you can make that a little bit shallower, and then you get more of these effects that, you know, that blur things out. I really like that. It's almost like once you got used to it, you think, hey, I cannot imagine images without these things. Even if they're really small and tiny, like dust particles hanging in the air, it really adds this kind of atmosphere to your scene. Really, really nice. I think I might put this into, oh yeah, also if you wanted to visualize this a little bit better and you don't want a gray background and you don't want to draw your dome, like, you know, would be with the dome. If you don't want that, if you want to judge this by a particular color of background just for visualization, you can grab yourself the environment tab here, and that lets you just preview this with the background, either with a picture, like with just a flat image, or just with the color. I tend to do that sometimes. You get access to that under window, panes, and then there's environment, or you just right click on any of these here and then just get the add pane from here. And the way this works is that on the environment tab, you can go to type. That's usually none. And if you drop that down, you can choose backdrop here. And then you have the backdrop color. And you can have, you know, this, if you can also, you can put an image in here. If you wanted to do that, you can browse for one. I'm just going to go and grab a color just so that we can judge this better, either something like a dark gray, or if you're envisioning for your final image to have something along the lines of a dark blue sky and you don't have access to it otherwise. You know, so now I'm thinking, hey, these are actually too blurred out. Now that I see it with a darker background, I'd like to blur them out less. And maybe I'm envisioning something like a dark blue sky, and then I can see, is this where I want to go or not? So yeah, environment tab, you can make it show up in the render. That's this button here, visible in render. If you switch that off, then you can still see it in the preview, but it's not going to come out in the render. So this is going to be a transparent render now. So that you have the option there. You can flip it if you had an image. So just thought I'd bring that to your attention. Oh, they aren't, Daniel. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we can talk about this as well. Tinkerbell sprites. Yes, I like it. I like it. So those are these types of particles. I'm gonna have a look at fires and smoke planes now. But we're going to have a look at how you can create these things yourself from scratch. If you have a particular idea for a particular color of particles, or if you wanted to replicate something else, I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Let's just have a look at the, I'm going to go and set this back to kind of a gray, because I like that kind of a neutral thing here. And I'll go and have a look at the fires now. I think we could, should we just make these particles invisible? Let me just go make them invisible so that they're still there if we wanted to bring them in. Let's talk about fires. Actually, one other thing about depth of field, I'm so sorry, is something that I've been meaning to share with you. Cake One brought this to my attention just recently, and sometimes it's very difficult to see this line here. You know, this green thin little short thing that is essentially the important bit, but in my case it's not actually where his jaw is, it's where my eyes are here, and it's just tricky to see that. Thankfully there is a way to make that show up a little bit better, and I thought I'd show you quickly where that is. So it's this line here that's very important, yet so almost invisible. So the way to make that a bit stronger show up is you select your camera, and then on the parameters tab there is a section here which is called display, and I think in there is something called scene view, and in here we have something called the focal point scale, and that's set to 100. We also have the sightline opacity, which is set to 30%. So sightline is how much this thing shows up. So 30% is the default. If I go and crank this up to 100%, then I can see it's a little bit just easier to see. So this was 30%. This is it completely gone with 0, and 100% means, you know, this is literally shows up now, but it still hasn't changed its length. So ideally we want that to be a little bit longer, and that is where the focal point scale parameter comes in. If I increase that from 100% to its maximum of 200, it gets a little bit longer, and it's probably going to be all right for my eye. So I can now go and bring it forward just a little bit to bring it to the eyes there. But sometimes you just need that to be even longer, and that is where we can just disable the limits here. So this is a slider like any other in Daz Studio, and if you wanted to do this on any slider, works for poses, works for literally anything, you can just go click that little gear icon here, head over to parameter settings, and this is where basically the limits are set, and the maximum value is 200%. So you can either increase that, or you can just remove the limits altogether, hit accept, and then there are no more limits on this slider. You can make it as big or as small as you want. So that cranking that up now, you've now made it to 100% in the line sight opacity, and the focal point scale is much larger. So it's in fact an X, it's not just a line, it's an X. So that makes it a bit easier if you look from the side to see where your focal plane needs to be. So in my case, on the camera tab, I can go and just adjust the focal distance ever so slightly there to his eyes there. Kitty, good question. To a certain extent, yes, but because they're so small, you barely notice that. So usually if the particles had an emission value that is very large, they don't look colorful anymore. So they blow out very quickly. And at that point, they would affect your scene lighting. But let me just demonstrate this. Good point. So if I had them here, I can see a color, and that means they're not blowing out like a light. So if I head over to my surfaces tab now, in emission here, this is the light they currently have. If I were to set this luminance value here, if I just add a couple of zeros into here, then I can see that they're starting to affect my scene lighting, but I can also see that they're losing the light that they actually emit. So yes, you are correct, they do that. But usually you wouldn't crank them up all that much. It's a bit like, you can think of it as if you had real life fireflies that are buzzing around you. They would eventually illuminate the room, you know. Like in Fortnite, when you find a jar of fireflies, it actually glows a little bit. So yeah, same principles apply there. So careful with making that too much, or adjust your scene lighting accordingly. Like a little bit of illumination might not be so bad, like this. That actually gives us a really nice glow on his body here. Very good question. So speaking of emissives, we also have fire planes, and they work by the same principle. So to keep in mind, this is really easy on the GPU and on the render time, because we're hardly rendering any geometry at all, and the textures are fairly small. They're instances, so they're replicated, but they're not loaded into memory multiple times. So it's a very clever system of how to do this. And fires or fire planes work pretty much exactly the same way. So I'll go into my bottom viewport here and go over to do we have that here? No, we don't have any fire planes here. We do have in the forest effects, we have this VDB container here, and this is something that's a little bit like the we'll go back to fire in a minute while we're here. So the VDB container, that's a principle that's been introduced in Daz Studio 4.20, in which Iray now lets us render actual VDB objects. It might sound a little complicated when I say it like that, but the VDBs are essentially described volumes as voxels. So if you imagine a cloud in the sky, that's a three-dimensional object, and if you were to put that into a box, into a container, it looks a little bit like a Rubik's cube sliced, into which you then cut the container up into what's known as voxels. Think of it as three-dimensional pixels. And each of these either has smoke or doesn't have smoke, and in so doing we can describe the three-dimensional volume. And the VDB standard is something that describes such volumes. And then each voxel can have properties like, you know, are you transparent, are you opaque, do you have a color, do you have a temperature? So that's how these things are described. And the current implementation of what we have with Iray is that we can read kind of basic VDB volumes out, and the forest effects make use of that. So the way this works is a little bit like our Firefly cage here. I double click the VDB container in here, and then it is just kind of a transparent volume here, and inside of that, this is a particular shader that's applied to this box here on the surfaces. It's called volume, and in the volume channel here, we can go and load a VDB file inside here. So this one's called rolling fog. That's already in there, but we have several others with this product. So this is where that VDB file actually gets loaded. It's inside this container here. So if I go and look at that, I can see some fog creeping in here. I can also go and bring that up a little bit so that I can see what's happening there, ground fog. And the cool thing about this is that this is not a two-dimensional thing. This is also fairly easy on the render time because the voxels aren't all that large, so you're not talking geometry. Can I have two viewports in Iray? This is a serious strain on my computer. There we go. Yes, it just about works. You can see it is actually a volume, and you can look at it from all three dimensions, and that is kind of cool. So yeah, this was a new addition in Daz Studio 4.20, and the forest effects, they kind of make use of that. So when we select this and go back to the product here, I think it's in materials, you have different types of fog that you can load in here. So these are scales here at the bottom. These are the types of volumes. I think rolling fog A is already loaded. So B looks a little different, and C looks like that. So the benefit of having something like this is that you have no matter where you point your camera from, it goes and just, you know, there's just fog there. Kind of cool. You can also create these yourself. If you had a program that can create VDBs. And the format itself is actually very powerful. I'll just go move that behind him somewhat. Yeah, the format itself is actually very powerful, but the Iray shader currently doesn't, if I understand it correctly, doesn't acknowledge things like the temperature of the object, or, you know, if how hot it is. Usually this is done to emulate like animations of fire and all that. So if you wanted this to be less opaque, so it's like it's very strong now, you can either go to the there's presets here for that, but you can also go literally to the actual volume and mess with the density multiplier. So if 100, that's how opaque this thing is. If I set that to 50, then it is half as opaque. Or if I set that to 10, it becomes less and less visible in the scene. So if you wanted something like a thin fog, you can just make that, you know, a wispy little cloud here, or you can crank that up to something, you know, much hotter. This product here also has colors for the fog. So if you don't want a gray fog, you want something like this, then you can apply that and see how that floats your board. Only works in Iray. It doesn't. You don't see anything in the preview, either in texture shaded or in filament. They don't currently support those things. There she blows. Yes. Indeed, yes, you can put a light source into those and then make them kind of brighten up a little bit. So that would almost be something that that emulates a fire. If we leave this, let me just go. Let me show you that. That's a good idea. I'll go make that 100 again. And if I go and put maybe a point light here. Just into the center of my viewport. Here it is. I'll go and left click and drag that directly into my volume here. I could make it easier myself and just switch one Iray viewport off. But what's the fun in that? Bring that up a little bit. And so you see that the volume actually extends, the VDB file extends the volume. That's another such thing that we might want to be aware of. There is a parameter on the surfaces tab with which you can clip that, and that doesn't look also good. Like clip to geometry. If I switch that on, then the VDB file is kind of constrained to the cube, and usually that's disabled, so that it can extend and show us the whole, show us his huge shape. So we can see a little bit of a light happening here. If I mess with the light's kind of quality here, if I make that stronger, first of all, maybe 50,000, then we can see it coming out. I can also go and change the light geometry from a point light into something maybe like a sphere. So then we don't just have a pixel emitting light, we now have a little sphere emitting light. There it is, I can just about see it. You can make that larger. The height or diameter parameter 10 as a default. If I make that 30, then it becomes 3 times larger. There we go. We also have the cool option that we don't maybe want to render the emitter, so you can switch that off. You can still see that the light is coming out, that we're just not rendering the emitter anymore. So now if I go and make that even hotter, then it's kind of emulating a fire, I suppose. You can put multiple smaller point lights into VDB that'll also look like a fire. And of course, most importantly, you can go and change the temperature or the color of your light. So if you wanted to have something that is maybe orangey, orange, yellow, red, you can use multiple point lights in that. That also creates you a fire. Not bad, and if we look at it from with our depth of field, it is convincing. So very creative uses of these VDB things that you can have there. Yeah, that's a nice effect. If we add our fireflies on top of that, we almost have a presentable image. Isn't that exciting? I can't remember which one of these I've increased the emission on. I think it was the first one. I want to switch the bottom viewport back into filament. Maybe you can switch both of these on. Hey, not bad at all. Indeed, Tug. Very nice indeed. It is, isn't it? And what I find amazing about this is that in our scene we have nothing. We have literally a figure, a camera, and we're messing around with some, interesting little props, and I find that really, really cool. And also notice how quick this renders. I mean, my rig's okay, it's not a super uber machine, but it's fairly good. And when some scenes, when I load them in, I think to myself, hey, I really only need the 1 or 2 houses in the background. I don't need the whole city. But of course, if I load it in, it just takes a long time to navigate through the viewport and also go and render out the picture later. So very nice. So this is also with the default HDRI. So we haven't loaded in kind of a better HDRI. We haven't worked on maybe bringing out his facial features a little bit more. But that's just something we could do. So another way then of emulating a fire behind him would be with the fire plane. So that would work just like the original emitter that I've shown you works. So that's a plane with an emissive picture on it. We can use the same thing in the background here that we now have as a volume. Let me go and put my point light onto this container here, and then just switch that off with Control eyeball icon. I'll switch off both the container as well as anything that is parented to it. And maybe these 2 guys here, maybe they can go in a group. Maybe this can be our particle, just particles. I'll head over to create group, and then I'll accept that invitation to parent the selected items to the new group, and I'll call this KA particles, just so that we know they're different from the other particles. Control eyeball icon to switch those off, and in a minute maybe iRay is gonna catch up here, and for some reason they're still rendering. I don't know why. Maybe also I should save my scene, huh? How's that? Just while I'm here. I'll call this one Tree Giant Demo. Oh, Boost, yes, absolutely. JH, absolutely. I like Boost, and it's working really well for me. Do try it out. It's one of those things that if you don't have hardware that is capable enough to render large scenes, Boost might really be able to help you out there. There's a demo on my channel actually of how it works, but essentially just a little aside here, you have 2 options in Boost. You can either use this thing called streaming mode. That's basically whenever you switch the viewport into iRay here, it would go and use the boost hardware instead of your own graphics card to render the picture. Or you can use the Q mode, in which you essentially go into your render settings, and under advanced bridge, you get, once you're connected to your server, you can add an image to the queue. So that would then essentially compile all the assets it needs, sends them to the server, and on the server in a web interface you have to click a button, and that then goes and starts rendering the whole queue. But the cool thing about that is that you can submit 3 or 4 pictures, let it do the rendering, and you keep working on the next scene and then go and submit the next picture. So very cool. And it's awesome for Mac users who can't actually install NVIDIA hardware. It's fantastic for laptop users who don't have access to, like, you know, heavy graphics cards in their laptops. And it's also great news for those of us who just don't have enough VRAM. So I'm stuck with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and I think on Boost you can have something like 96 if you wanted to. That'll take forever to submit, but you can have that. And I don't think I'd ever be able to afford a graphics card that has that much VRAM. So yes, Boost, quite nice. Yeah, try it, Kitty, absolutely. I can show you how it works in a stream sometime. And we can arrange that, and then we can just, you know, put it through the ringer, and I can show you the various bits and pieces of how it works. I'm more than happy to do that. It's a powerful system, and it's just, I think it's just this new way of thinking. Hey, maybe I don't need to invest into a graphics card just because I have 3 scenes that I need to render. I don't need to have this thing all the time, and I don't have 2-3 grand, whatever how much they cost right now, just for these few pictures. I wish there was a way to render them. I wish I could basically borrow a graphics card for a week from somebody and then give it back. And this is kind of what you can do with Boost if and when you need it. Kind of cool. Okay, so we've got our particles here. There's also other shapes that you can put on your particles here. That's also quite nice. I'm going to go back to the Matty product, the smoke and fire. That was that under props? It was, wasn't it? Somewheres. I'll just go search for it. There it is. MMX fire and smoke for iRay. So there's this here, which is the fire plane. And that is, if I go and just double click it, then it comes in at the center of the scene, literally there. If that is not where I want that, I'll go and delete it. I can also go and hold Alt while I left click and drag this into the scene, and then I get this little red spot here. If I'm thinking, well, I don't want this in the center of my scene, I want this to be kind of behind him. Maybe the fire is kind of here, and I can just let go, and then the plane is loaded in there. So yeah, the same principle. It is just a plane, really simple, and on it we have this shader that suggests there is a fire. And I believe there's also, under materials, there are some other fire shapes on here as well, so you can then load those on. And then did I think maybe not. I thought there were other fire shapes that you could put on there. Maybe it's a different prop that I have to use for that. That's definitely the only. Oh, that's the other. It's another prop here. So this is a small fire, and then there's another one here. This is kind of a background fire. So if I go and drag this in, this is kind of the fire wall here, as such. And I think the materials are made for that. Fire background. Let's just quickly see if that is correct. Yes, so this is the thing that goes and swaps out the pictures and the shaders on this fire here. So it's a little bit like the concentric circles that I was talking about. If you needed multiple layers of fire, you can totally do that. And then keep an eye on what that looks like in your scene. By also making one further away from the other, you can add funky variations there. If this needed to be bigger or smaller, you can just go and arrange that. And the cool thing is also you have a preview of this. So maybe there's this goes on an angle, and we're going to put that here, or just behind him. And then if you wanted to duplicate that, edit, duplicate node or node hierarchies, depending on if you had something parented to that. Go and turn that around like so. And these things are also emissive, so they will give us some nice backlight here. If I go and render that now, we should get a really nice backlight that happens there. So it'll give them a little bit of a tiny bit of a catchlight here. We can the background is so big that we can barely see our two little fires here. Second fire is barely in vision, so I'm going to put this over here. Look how quickly this renders. So this is what I find really cool about these things. They are just so easy on the whole. Now he's literally in hell, the poor tree giant. They are literally so easy on your GPU, and especially on medium spec or lower spec systems. This is just a breeze to render with these things. But you get all these effects directly inside Daz Studio. So if we combine that with our particles now, that's kind of cool. If we think the fire here is a bit too literally too hot, that's also a matter that we can change on the surfaces tab, and that's on the emissions channel. So if this luminous efficacy is too much, just turn that down, and then the emission is just less. Zero kind of just renders the diffuse, so you don't want that. You want a little bit of stuff to come out of there. So 10 is, I suppose, the minimum that you can get away with for it to look natural. So maybe we'll make that a little hotter here, like so. There we go. And then also you can, if you think these are too dominant, say if we go back to the fire background now. Is it? Oops. Control click, there we go. If you think these are a little bit too dominant, you can also make the luminance slightly less. So that's under geometry. You can just make them less opaque, a little bit invisible, essentially. So by toning that down, that's under geometry, cut out opacity. That's another way to dim them down a little, as much or as little as you like. And now they're kind of just blending in here. So it's another way of controlling how strong they are. Same with the fire curtain here. If that's too much, we just tone down the opacity a little bit. Because they're just pictures, it's really, really easy to adjust. Or maybe the background isn't quite the correct color that we like. So now it's a little bit darker, so the character is a little bit lighter that way. If you wanted to head over to the base channel, and you can go and maybe put a different color spin on this. If you wanted to make this a bit redder, then we see that the flames in the background get a little redder. Can also change the ones in the foreground. That's on the base channel. This is the actual picture that's drawn on it. If you draw with white, the picture comes out just like it is. If you draw something, you know, purpler or something on there, maybe purple isn't great. Maybe we'll stick with something like red, dark red, and you see a color variation there. Quite funky, the stuff that you can do with it. Oop. Which one did I change? Oh, it's this one here. I'll make it blue just for the fun of it. And you can just about see that blue creeping in here. So very cool. Just the stuff that you can do with a couple of cheap planes. It's just, so really I suppose the takeaway that I'm trying to instill in you is that it doesn't have to be full geometry to look cool. That is really what it's all about. Find ways to make it look cool. It doesn't have to be so hard on your computer, you know. I think aside from the fire, don't we also have smoke here? Background smoke. I don't remember which this goes on. Is that the large one or the small? Yeah, there we go. So this is the large plane in the background. It has this is another way of doing smoke. So if you needed smoke, you can use that, and then I just pick the type of smoke or fog that you need. I'm going to go and switch our fires off here, and then you can also layer it. So if you had geometry in here and you needed some fog in front of him, you could go and have this literally in front of our guy. And this is a bit much here, but like I said, if you head over to the Surfaces tab under Geometry, cut out opacity, turn that down, then we get a little bit of fog in front of him. So the way to deal with this in scenes that have geometry, and if you wanted to make the fog appear to go denser as you go away further, you just have multiple copies of this around. So if we had, let's bring in a tree, for example, to illustrate that. Tree is kind of behind him, and maybe the tree is supposed to be a little bit more foggy than he is. Let's see, that's something we can do with the nature pack here. Is that under environments? From Howie Farks, Grassy Cove, yes. Grassy Cove, careful with these. If you load those, they load in so much geometry. I mean, this looks gorgeous, but I'm barely capable of moving my viewport around, so I'm not going to use the whole scene. I'm just going to go into props here and grab myself a small tree out, like maybe this one here. I don't know how tall they are. Sometimes they're a little large. So I'll go and put this tree here. Can we see that? Yeah, we can just about see that in the background here. That's cool. So if I wanted to have the tree appear foggier than my friend, I could just go and grab my fog object here. I just about put that here. So now it's behind him, so that means he's not in fog, but the tree is starting to get fogged up here. So I can just go and increase the cutout opacity, and the more I make that happen, the foggier the tree becomes, or the foggier the distance becomes. Good to add some visual depth to the scene. So quite creative, this little product. I do like it that we can have either a fiery background, or we can have a smoky background, or you can combine them and you can make these kind of Cake One-like renders, if you will, that often have lots of these things going on. So it's kind of nice. I'm going to make my camera's depth of field a little bit less, maybe 11. What happens if we load the fire on it now, just out of curiosity? Like maybe like this fire. What does that look like? Oh, trees burning out as well. Crazy stuff. Let me show you something else. If I go get rid of this and we leave everything else in place, and maybe just go and put this lonely tree further in the background. Let me show you these parallax backgrounds. They're also very, very cool, and how they can work for you. So let's see if I can find it here. Actually, that's a Kindred Arts product, so I'll go over there from here, and this is them here. And it's really difficult to create a promo image for that suggests what this thing actually does, but you see it suggested here. This is the kind of a landscape, and you know, father and daughter go hiking, and this is what it would look like with just the scene in it, and they encounter a robot. So good story. But in the background here, there's really nothing you can see, and adding something like this in the background here kind of suggests we're not alone. We're in a forest that's on the outskirts of a city. So it's kind of it's an important thing for storytelling, that you say, you know, there's not nothingness here. There's, you know, there's stuff here, and this is what these concentric circles do. Wonderful panoramic promos. I really like that. So this is another good example. Here's the city, and we have the figure, and we have the story, and this here and that the trees that wouldn't normally be there. And that's really important. If there would just be a white hole, you'd be solely relying on the HDRI to provide a single layer of whatever we see, and that might not be what we want to see, to be honest. So these concentric circles, they really make that a possibility. Another cool idea to use them here. These houses here and the blue sky doesn't exist in the render other than with the just with the concentric circles. Very nice. Parallax backgrounds, this is called. So once again here, motel, this is a very simple scene, but what really makes it is this is the outer circle here and this is the inner circle, and it doesn't matter that it's not geometry, it looks cool. And you can go and rotate them independently from one another. You can also stretch them and squish them so that you see more or less of stuff in there, because often it's just on a really small part of your image that you need to fill something in. Same here. This is another great example here. Yeah, very cool. Background off, background on. Exactly. Let's see how to use it. It is really simple. I don't know if my tree is actually a good demo model here. Perhaps I should put a car in or something like that. Or maybe I'll bring the tree a little bit closer here to somewhere here. I don't know. Don't know yet. We'll see. So parallax backgrounds then. This is them here. Comes in as one prop that's just called background, and then it has several materials here, and then you also have some render settings that give you a different time of day, so that's kind of nice. And then on the shaders front there are some presets of how much or how little your background is stretched, but you can do that also manually. That's also possible. So it starts with the prop, double click that, comes in at the center of the scene, but it is so large that if you go and click it, Control F will show you this is how large it is. So kind of nice here. You can also scale it down. That is possible as well. And you can preview it as well. That's also nice. So let's start with the inner circle has currently got this bit on, and the outer circle's got these buildings on here. So if I go and grab the inner circle, I can either use this as a rotation here. Can I just make the outer circle? I'm trying to disable that just to show you this, but I guess that's not quite possible. There, now we see separation here. I just wanted to show you that what the two things look like there. So inner circle, you can go and rotate until it fits your image, and the same for the outer circle. Rotate it until we see what we want to see in the background. So the preset is trees on the inner circle, houses on the outer circle, but these materials here are split between inner and outer. So you can go and swap the inner circle out. So these are those trees. You can also make them different trees, or different trees, or you can make them mountains. Kind of it depends on what your scene needs. These are the inner ones. Very cool. And then the same for the outer circle here. So these are those buildings, I believe. And then we have buildings B. This looks more like New York. The first one looked a bit like London. I like that. And then here we have some this is what we've seen in the promo image. They're like houses by night. Whatever's dark gray here now, imagine that's your dark blue night sky. Or you have something like, ancient cities in the background. More by night, like New York by night. Or is it Miami? I can't tell. Could be, no, it's probably New York. And there's also more buildings by day. Kind of cool. And we have terrain. So if we're just, if we want mountains, we can have that. It's just, I love the idea because it's just so easy to implement, and it just solves such a big problem that we sometimes face in having our scenes. And the other thing I wanted to show you while I'm here, before we look at this in a rendered view, if you look at the buildings and you think, actually let's have a look at these ones here. If you're thinking, hey, that's cool, but I'd like to see a little bit more, or the buildings need to be in a slightly different arrangement, then aside from just rotating them, you can also scale the UVs, and that's done under surface. And we go into the outer here under geometry, and then they say the horizontal tiles. So that's something that you can go and stretch. Then you have, you know, stretched out buildings, or you can squeeze these in, so then you have more buildings and more repetition. So it's basically there to avoid or bring in repetition, or make the background just have background variation. Usually this isn't shown in full focus. This is usually something that's a little bit out of focus, so it is enough to just hint that that's there. The same as possible for the inner material here. More denser trees, less denser trees. Kind of cool. I like it. Yes, it's very, you can throw your own images on the background there. If you've got a scene that you've rendered and you'd rather it would be on there, then, you know, you can do that. See what that looks like rendered. With we probably don't see it because we have such a shallow depth of field. We probably don't even notice it. Yeah, cool. It's almost like we're rendering this with HDRI now. And we see all this black here, so I haven't given him a proper background. So I suppose we can just go and bring this down. And it's really nice if you see something like the, what are they calling in Camilla? The ones that we tried out, the mega terrains. They are really nice. They're really nice kind of almost open world terrains, and they're already built that there's a little bit of geometry on the outside that you don't see empty patches. But if you use that in conjunction with this, yes, that was it, wasn't it? If you use those things in conjunction with these concentric circles, it's really, really cool. I'll go and make the depth of field much shallower here, just so that we can see these things. I'll make that maybe 128. Yeah, that's too much, isn't it? 32 perhaps. Like that, you know, he's definitely in Central Park now somewhere. No doubt about this. And we haven't had these trees before, and we haven't had these buildings before. It's kind of cool. I like it. I like playing with these things. It's really cool. Mega terrain swampland. Yes, there's a few of them. It's not just the swampland. There's other ones that he has, but yeah, this is a really cool set. If you're into epic landscapes, put this on your wish list and have a look at the others. And this is what it renders like out of the box. It's really cool. So this is the kind of the geometry that I was talking about in the background. This is fog effects come with it. Render settings come with it. It's really cool. And you have like 4 or 5 presets. It's a really, really cool set. And it just suggests this you know, open world video feel. This is a little bit like the scene that I've built with individual props. I wasn't using the mega terrain for this, but yeah, if you're looking into something like this and you want like a house in the background, or like a, you know, that castle, like the whole Elden Ring feel, you can totally do that. These are all geometry. If you need to remove a tree or two there, I think they're instances, so it's very efficiently done, but you can go and just remove them if you needed, you know, space for a house or whatnot. So yeah, very cool. Very nice. So also a very cool product that I recommend you get. And here we go. These are the forest effects. Once again, this is kind of, I think this is all solid from this Tree Giants bundle. He would fit in really nicely in this scene. I hope you liked it. Oh yeah, here we see a bit of an overview. And there's endless variation in these things as well. So kind of cool. Thank you. We're watching the live stream right now. Yeah, a few props come with that. This is not snow. This is just untextured, no textures on this. Yeah, very cool. So some of these products are just very cool. I'm going to have a quick look at questions now, and then I'll show you how you can make your own particle effects from scratch inside Daz Studio. Let's do that. Oh, good point, WebSoul. I think it's just 2 different vendors. Ultra Scenery, that is by Howie Fox, and he's very much into nature, and that is something that gives you the building blocks to build something like that yourself. It comes with kind of suggestion scenes. The Mega Terrain is essentially like a full open world kit, if you will. And yeah, so I think Mega Scenery comes with clever scripts as well that lets you scatter your own grass around a landscape and all that, or define paths along the way. So it's a bit more complex. But we can look at that another time. It's also a very cool product. I like the Ultra Scenery. I like what Howie does. Howie is, man, if you look at his promos, it's insane. And they do take a bit of a toll on the render time, I gotta say. But yeah, it looks absolutely impressive. So this is literally what the scene comes with. This here is the Grassy Cove. This is in the Tree Giant Mega Bundle, so you do get that. But it is, so it's all like, you know, based on little bushels like that are replicated like 100,000 times, or maybe 1,000 times. So yeah, very nice. But it's not easy. It's not light on the GPU. So expect large render times. If you wanted to render a portrait in here and use this as a backdrop, that's heavy. That's going to take a long time, because there's translucency on each of these cards, and iRay does calculate that. There's a lot of geometry in here, and so if you wanted to have that as an out of focus background, this would be overkill. If you wanted to portray like a detailed landscape, this is going to work great. But if you wanted to use this as a background object, you're gonna be penalized with a really long render time. It does look great, but there are other ways of getting the same result much faster. If this is not, if you don't need this as detailed as this. Let's take a look at questions. I'm sure there's lots. Habib, Sufi, have these particles any effect on lighting? Yes, we've totally spoken about that. Can you touch on f-stop as well, says Daniel, related to focal distance? Yes, I think I've done that already. Let me know if you need more clarification on this. In a nutshell, the smaller the f-stop value is, the more stuff you see in focus, and the smaller this, so the larger this value is, the more stuff is in focus, and the smaller this value is, the less stuff is in focus. That's kind of a good way to remember this. What's the difference between ultrascatter and flockit? Oh, flockit I don't actually know, but we will speak about ultrascatter in a moment here. And Habib was also saying, just wondering, what's your setup specifications? I have a HP Z800 workstation with two Xeon CPUs. They're the E5 2670, I believe. E5 2670, two CPUs. And I also have two GPUs, the RTX 2080 GPUs with 8 GB of RAM. And I have an M2 drive as my main system drive, and another M2 drive for editing. So those are very fast drives. They're faster than SSDs, and I have 48 GB of system RAM. So it's not, you know, it's a system from yesteryear essentially. GPUs are okay, but there's always stuff you can upgrade. But this is something that would have cost like $8,000 when you buy it new, but you wait 5 or 6 years and pick this up from eBay for $500, and that's what I've done. So I basically built that all from components myself, and yeah, that's how you can save some good money. Frank Gucci, I will never lose my items on my account, right on Daz? That is correct. Yes, that is correct. Once you buy something, it remains on your account forever. Even if the item is withdrawn from sale, you will still have access to it. So once you bought it, you always have access to it. And even items that are being discontinued, you'll always have access to it. Good question. Yeah, so this is kind of just going back to that. The smaller this number, the shallower the depth of field is, and the larger this number, the more stuff you see in focus. And focal distance is where exactly the median focal point is. So in this case, it's on his eyes. And if I make that smaller, then it goes back to the camera. If I make that larger, it goes beyond where it currently is. I type these things in because I'm kind of thinking photographically here. You can type in any value if you like, but typically lenses for digital cameras or for film cameras, they range between 2.8, or that's like a very open, very expensive lens, to something like 8, 11, 5.6 is another one, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32, 64, 128 in some cases. That's like really small. But what we can do with 3D that we can't do in the real world is that we can have something like an f-stop of 1, and that is extremely blurry. I think Stanley Kubrick had something on a movie once where he borrowed some lenses from NASA, where he had an f-stop of 0.7, which is insane. So I think literally 0 would be whatever. I think 1 is the same amount of light appears at the back of the lens that comes into the lens. So 1, and that's kind of a theoretical thing. There's nothing that's lost, basically. As soon as you put glass in the middle, some light is always absorbed. So whatever happens behind the lens is usually darker than what is in the front of the lens. And 1 would be the equal. And then anything that is higher than that, like 2.8, that means there's a little bit less light at the back of the lens than there is at the front. I think that's how it works. Don't quote me on that. And the tree giant Kemi, that was another question. Is he against the Genesis 8 figure? Yes, he is. It's actually a Genesis 8.1 figure. I think JH had a couple of questions about Boost. When you render the files, do they stay on the server once the render is completed? Do they own your file once you upload it to your server? No. So the way this works is you click a button on Boost, and then there's basically a virtual computer that's being built for you. It takes a couple of minutes, 5 minutes or so, and as soon as that's open, you start paying on a per minute basis. Whatever you do with it then belongs to you. You can then, once the render is finished, it stays on their server. You download the image, and the moment you say shut down the instance, everything is deleted. So they don't own your images or anything. That is literally just all your stuff. And if you haven't downloaded anything, when you shut down the instance, it'll all be lost. Yes, that is correct. David, is there a set of planes like that is for forests and trees instead of planes? You can probably make that yourself. If you have a tree or like a foresty scene, you could render that out and then create a little opacity map and just put that onto a plane. Maybe if we have time, I can show you how to do that. Do remind me, just in case I forget. Is the glue to floor utility by 3D Universe the same as the pin to floor? Was there another one? I'm not familiar with the pin to floor. I know the glue to floor, and that is something that fixes feet on the ground during animation. So it lets you essentially pin something and then dial in a pose on a figure, and the rest of the figure moves, but whatever you pinned isn't going to move. I'm not familiar with the other one, I'm afraid. And how to stop feet from sliding, that is one of those questions for animators that I've been looking for years. There's really, yes, a glue to floor is probably a good start with that. Other than that, to change the animation cycle, that is another tip I can give you. But yeah, animation is a tough topic, and especially keeping feet from sliding, every animator has lots of problems with that. And Daniel, yes, it will. So depth of field will affect both what's behind the focal plane as well as what's in front of it. So if I go, and actually no, not this. If I go to my man here, the tree giant, just so that we can see him here, I'll go and switch on the camera. Then essentially the green line is the thing that's definitely going to be in focus, and then on either way it starts to become blurry, and the further away from that middle line you go, the blurrier it gets. Usually it gets more blurry towards the back than the front, but the front also introduces blurriness. So from here, anything up to here, that also is blurry. So if we go and bring the tree on a, let's say on a f-stop of 8, if we take our tree that's currently behind him and is barely visible, but it's out of focus. If I go and take the tree and move that kind of here, that's round about where the focal plane is. So now the tree appears in focus. And if I go and move it forward, then I can see that the tree now is also out of focus. So I need to move it much closer to the camera to see that effect. But you can see that the stem here is totally blurring out, and yeah, it's now between the camera and the tree giant. So yes, you're absolutely right. It does that. David, good question. Can someone else at the boost see your renders or your scene components? No, nobody can. That's basically like a private instance, and the user credentials that get created for the instance that you make, they get wiped afterwards. So if you have your server up for like 2 or 3 hours, then only you can see what's actually going on there. And afterwards it gets deleted, so there's no issue about sharing resources that you're basically doing. You're not going to get into trouble for that, and nobody can see what you're rendering. So there's full privacy in that. Good question, very good question. Very good question. And Sari is late. Hey, no worries. You totally get to see how we create particles from scratch. I might go, shall I go and create a brand new scene for this? Nah, I'm just going to leave everything as it is. I might just go and save this one. Go out of iRay at the top here. I'm going to go and get rid of our, or not just get rid of, I'm just going to go and make them invisible. Parallax backgrounds. I've got my fire planes in here still. I might go and put the tree back into the background. Oops. Just so that we have some background action. Might just rotate it as well, like so, maybe there. Can even duplicate it so as he's kind of in the forest here. This whole animating several layers of background, that's actually classic 2D cartoon animation, by the way. If you've watched any of these, you can set up a shortcut for this as well. That's much easier. If you have a lot of things to duplicate, you can just make a shortcut for that, like Command D. If you had like one tree and you want to duplicate it 12 times, then don't use the menu. You can go into Window, Workspace, Customize, and then here under Actions you can find, I believe it's under Edit, you can find the duplicate function. Let's say duplicate hierarchies here, and then you double click into this field here where the shortcuts are. You right click on that and say change keyboard shortcut, and then it waits for you to press something. Let me say Control D. It says Control D is already in use. Are you sure you want to use it? Yeah, I'm good with that. Control D is exactly what I want to do. And then if you wanted to build multiple trees in the forest, you can just go and hit Control D, and there's another tree. And Control D, and then we go and put this somewhere else. So this is how you can essentially build yourself a little forest if you want. Yeah. Not really what I wanted to talk about, but sometimes it just happens that way, doesn't it? So we've got our trees here, and let's make our own particle backgrounds really and use them in our scene. Yes, absolutely. So what Brian said. So for my particle, I want to keep it as light as possible. So Matty was very clever. He's done things with textures, and he literally just used a plane, put the picture on the plane, and then that is what got replicated. So that's really the easiest thing that you can do. But if you wanted to have colored effects or whatnot, you can also do it with three-dimensional particles, like maybe dust particles or so. So for that, the first thing that we need is we need to make ourselves a particle. And I'm going to go and create a new primitive for that. And I think the smallest thing I can get away with is probably a sphere, because it's three-dimensional and I can go and tweak it. So I'm going to make it 0.01 meters, or I can probably also just make it centimeters here, and let's make it 0.1 centimeters. Sorry. I didn't mean to hit return. 0.1 centimeters is small enough. Maybe I'll just actually make it one centimeter. And the segments, I don't want them to be as high here, not 24. I think the smallest you can use for it to still be a three-dimensional thing is 3 and 3. So if I do that, then I go and hit Control, whoops, that's not what I meant, Control F. And there is what is kind of appears to be my sphere-ish. It really isn't. I've still got some fireflies here. Let me go and switch those off. I might go and make the sphere a little bit larger just so that I can see it a little better. New primitive sphere, and I'm going to make that maybe 10 centimeters. There. Perfect. So not exactly spherical anymore, but it is still three-dimensional, so that's nice. So I can squish it, make it a little flatter here, but it's really as low poly as I can kind of imagine. I'll make it squish it down like so as well. So let's say that is our three-dimensional dust particle here. I might go and call that, instead of sphere, particle. Almost Jay, almost particle. There. I'll give it a material while we're at it, and it basically revolves around it not being 100% white just on the default material here under base color. I'm just going to make it a little kind of medium gray perhaps, and I'll also give it a small color, like something just warm, like a beige type thing. That's how I imagine dust particles kind of floating around everywhere here. That's that. Also, I don't want it to be as shiny as this, so under glossy roughness, I'm going to crank that up to maybe 0.7, 0.8, something like that. And that's my particle. In order for that to replicate around my scene, I'm going to go and need to create a kind of a volume in which the particle can be scattered as such. And that happens also under create primitive. And this is going to be, it can be a sphere, it can be anything, it could be a cylinder, it could be a cube. Cube is usually the easiest to use, but any of the other primitives will work fine. Even something that you import from external sources, so if you have something that you bring in from Blender, as long as it's a kind of closed geometry, it'll work. I'm going to make it maybe just one division, and I'm going to make it 10 meters big. If I do that, there's my cube. Boom. That is large. You can change the size, it doesn't matter. You can make it invisible. We really only need to see it as a guide. Or if you prefer to tweak the size, then on the Surfaces tab here, head over to the Geometry section and just drop down the cutout opacity, so you see a little bit of a ghost, kind of a ghost field of where the thing is. So I don't know if that's going to be too big or too small. It's probably a bit large for what I need, so I might go and, I might go and bring that down to something like that. I don't know if it's going to be fireflies or if it's going to be just dust particles. I'll just go and put it into here, into my scene here. I'm going to rename my cube to be not so much the volume. That might be confusing because we're not dealing with VDBs. I might just go and call it container. And those are the two things that I need, a particle thing and a container. And then with the particle selected, I'll go and grab something super exciting, which is called Ultra Scatter. That's a utility by Howie Farks. It's kind of an interesting story behind it. So Howie used to be very prolific, very cool. Thank you, Brian. Absolutely, that's the link. Carrara creator. So Howie made scenes in and for Carrara, and they looked stunning. They're still available for sale. If you're a Carrara user, you would have most definitely come across Howie Farks scenes. And when he transitioned to Daz Studio, one thing that he didn't find was the replicator. So what the replicator can do is, like, say you had a landscape and you had a bushel of grass and you want to make like 1,000 duplicates of this grass in instances along the plane, and that tool didn't exist, so Howie went ahead and wrote it himself. I don't know, the man has an amazing brain. I don't know how he did it, but he managed to do it, and eventually what came out was this product called Ultra Scatter, and that is a key behind replicating something either along a surface, along a matrix, or in a container. And in our case, we're going to use this container. So the way you use this is that you select your particle, then you double click the script, and then it goes and runs this. And it's a little tricky to understand, but all the features of professional replicators are in here. So we can replicate along a surface, a volume, or a matrix. If we need a volume, that is my cube that I've just made. The particle that I've selected is already pre-selected here. So the scatter object is the particle. And I want to go and use the preview instance as full is good, and I don't need to import anything. That's going to come in a minute. The target object is where we're going to replicate these things into. So I'll go and pick my container from here, and then it goes ahead and would replicate currently 20 of my particles inside this container, and they're going to be randomly placed. The container has also been made invisible automatically, so that's essentially all there's to it. Now it's about tweaking the setting. So 20 I'm hardly going to see, so I'm going to go and maybe make it 500 just to see what comes out. Then I say volume scatter, and we'll see what comes out. Whoop, the police, they're after me. So if I go and zoom in there, I can now see, I might just go make my trees invisible here. There. Whoop. Not the particle, just the trees. There. So these are now my little dust particles here. But the problem is, maybe there's a bit too many of them. That could be. The problem is that they're all exactly the same. So they're all instances. So it's very easy and very what's it called, light on the geometry, but they're all exactly the same. They have the same size, they have the same rotation, and there's really, that just doesn't look very good. If I replicate them again, they come out exactly the same way, because all randomization is built on a random seed, and that's basically exactly what we got here as well. So the cool thing is that I can go, my goodness, something terrible is going on outside. So the cool thing is when I have my scatter group selected here, I can go and run the script again, and it will look at the settings that have been used previously. So that's really nice. So if you wanted to make a change, you don't have to type in everything again. It remembers. So like in my case, it remembers I had 500 particles here, and that my container was the target object, and that my particle was the scatter object. So it remembers all that, and that I was in volume mode. So that's very clever. So I can change the number here if I wanted to have more or less. But most importantly, at the top here under distribution and scaling and rotation, this is where I can change aspects about my scatter. Currently, I don't need distribution. That's if you wanted to have a height shader or something in there, I don't really need that. But if you had something like a plane and you want trees to grow only from a certain height, you can tell UltraScatter about it. It wouldn't place trees on ground level. It will only do that like, higher above, wherever you set that value. My thing is about scaling. So it goes and uses random scaling from 100% to 100%. So there's no scale variation in there at all. So I think my particles are a little large, so I'll make that from maybe 30% to 100%. So now I have a scale variation in there. I get larger and smaller particles in my scatter, which is really cool. Next, we're going to use rotation here, and I'm going to go and vary this. So I'll leave these on their default rotation along the X, Y, and Z axis. Mine are okay to move in literally 3 dimensions. So I'm okay to increment them literally the full whack. So from 0 to 180 degrees in all 3 directions, they'll be able to rotate now. And that is all I need. I'll hit volume scatter. It goes and recalculates things, and we should see some variation in our particles now. We do, but only in the size. So it's because Jay's messed up the values. That's cool for rotation. That's okay. Let's do this again. So size variation is there, rotation variation isn't there. It's because I think I've done it the wrong way. I think these can be left on 0 and it is actually the first value that we need to change. So it doesn't have to go 180. You can just go a little bit kind of depends on what you want. But yeah, it's the first set of values. I always get those things mixed up. Hit volume scatter. And do we see rotated particles? Yes! Rotation in particles. Awesome stuff. So now they're rotated any which way. Size variation and rotation variation. Good stuff. And that's essentially the end of it. This is our own particles now. If I go back to iRay, I can see what they look like. They're 3-dimensionals now. So with our depth of field still intact, we'll see what that looks like. Yeah, there we go. Good stuff. That might be a bit too much depth of field. Put that kind of to 16. Actually, was working all right, wasn't it? Let's say 11. Oh, let's say 8. If you have things like this guy and you think, hey, that's really not in a good position, but everything else is okay, you can either go and move your ultra scatter container around like we discussed, or you can animate and rotate it just like Tux suggested. Let me go and see if I can go, sorry, container, haha. Rotate container, nope, doesn't work. Why not? Doesn't rotate. Oh, there we go. Didn't want to rotate for me though. So yeah, that's kind of placement is a bit of a problem, but either you move this thing or you rescatter. So this might work, but you might also say, hey, maybe I'm not entirely happy about the distribution of my particles. So if you were to go onto your scatter thing again and then just go double click the script and just hit volume scatter again, the placement and rotation would be exactly the same as the calculation before, and that's because the same initial random seed is used. Also, I was thinking, I guess it wasn't, because now seriously we have things in different places. Usually it's exactly the same. So if you wanted to change this, you can go and change this value here, like for rotation or for scaling or for distribution, which we haven't used, or at the front here as well. Do we have anything? No. But yeah, rotation and scaling, the things that we've changed. If you change this value here, the seed value, then the calculation should be different. So I thought it should be exactly the same when we go and move this around. Oh, sorry, don't move this around. If it is, then it is something totally new that I haven't seen yet. No, now it is exactly the same. So this thing and all the other particles are exactly in the same spot. So if you wanted to change that around, then you can go and change this value. It doesn't have to be by much, like, 20, 50 is probably enough. And rotation, change that as well to maybe 1000. I thought there was also one at the front here. Placement random order. Slightly different position now. Good stuff. So one other thing, you can see that some of these things are in focus, and that's okay. But if you wanted them to not look like edgy, like in the background and in the foreground we don't really see, but if you find they're a bit too edgy, you can go to your particle and then add a subdivision surface modifier. It's a little heavier on the geometry that way, but it's a fairly easy fix. So edit object, geometry, convert to sub D, and then the dust particle is much rounder. If you wanted it to have even rounder edges, you can go to mesh resolution and just crank this up here, view sub D level from 1 to 2, and then this thing just gets smoothed out now. And then finally, if you wanted to give it an emission value or color, you can do that on the surfaces tab. So either the base color, I'll leave that alone and just use the emission color. So sometimes, especially if you have a kind of a darkish kind of background and you want these things to pop out a little more, then you can just go and use a color. Anything other than black will make this thing emit light. And the defaults might not be enough, so I tend to use watts here for that. And then they're really glowing, so you gotta turn this down like maybe to 5 or so. Still too much, maybe like 2. Or just, leave it on where it was. And then just use this value to make it higher or smaller. So I'll go and add a little 0 in here. And then I'll make some kind of pop here. You can also change the emission color. So if you wanted them to glow a little orange, make your own fireflies that way. Or literally any color that you prefer. So homemade sparkles. And then if you needed more, if you think, hey, that's nice, but that's just not the amount of sparkles I'm looking for, you can just go and increase the amount of instances here. So 500 is trying to get 500. Maybe we'll make that twice as much with 1,000. Scatter again, and we'll see what happens. Good question, Habib. That's probably something you need to try out and play with. If we make them kind of more like a yellow, kind of a bluer color. You can also go and shape them so that they're more elongated, like little cylinders. And then don't make them rotate in all directions. Make them literally just come down like strips. And that would probably suggest rain and simulate rain. You can try that. So very clever suggestion, very good way of trying to get a rain effect. Yeah, just make sure they're not rotated in all directions. They're just coming down. Very cool idea. Very cool idea. Now you've done it. Now you've got my dandruff up. David, very funny. Very funny. And also transparency, yes, that's the other thing. Like I said earlier, if you find, hey, this is a good effect in principle, but some of these are just popping too much, like Brian suggested, geometry, cut out opacity, something slightly less, and then they're all kind of blending more into the background here. And you do all this on the particle, maybe 0.3, and then they just get more transparent and just blur into the background a little more. Yeah, very good suggestion. The snow tool, right? Also by Kindred Arts, I think he has like a snow and hail tool. I think very cool, very cool. New question. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Callie Ada, what is the difference between Ultrascatter Pro and Ultrascatter Advanced? That's a good question. I think only Howie can answer that. I think the advanced version has, actually let's go into Howie's account here. Lots of expansions for ultra scenery. Here's Pro, here's Advanced. For $4 more, get the Pro version. I think one didn't have the 3-dimensional bits and pieces. This is the Advanced version. What does that not have? I think Advanced can replicate on a plane, but it doesn't have the volume. Yeah, so this is all plane based, and it can replicate things along a plane, like trees. Yes, that was the difference. That was the difference. And then Pro can do that, but it can also distribute things inside of volume. So if you're interested in the thing that I've shown, I think you need the Ultrascatter Pro. If you already have Ultrascatter Advanced, and you want it to upgrade to Pro, I think there's an upgrade product available that you can use. Yeah, there we go. This is done as a matrix, I think. It's very cool stuff you can do with that. It's kind of the magic behind much of scene building, really. These things you don't have to provide. These come with the plugin. You can say, I'd like to have a little bit of a distribution thing. So rather than having everything everywhere with random gaps in between, you can add these maps. This is a very fascinating tool, this. Attract and repel, that is just also very cool. If you wanted, like, imagine these are grass bushels and these are trees, you can say, well, usually directly underneath a tree there's a little clearing where grass doesn't grow. You can provide that. Very cool. It's a good tool. Ultrascatter Pro. And Bonley John Lee Jones, yes, Boost for Daz does support canvases. It is absolutely true. It does support canvases. Just fantastic. There's one thing actually about Boost for Daz. If you've noticed, when you render something out inside Daz Studio, the picture that you save doesn't have a DPI value associated with it. Did you know that? So some people often ask, does Daz Studio render in 300 DPI or 72 DPI, or what's the score with that? And really the DPI only really comes into this whole dots per inch. That only makes sense when you print something, but it doesn't have anything to do with screen resolution as such. So as Daz Studio doesn't actually add a value in that field at all. But when you import something into things like Photoshop, they usually assign it a value, and then they give you a DPI equivalent resolution, that sort of thing. And Daz Studio itself doesn't set it, but if you render something in Boost for Daz and download that, it has that set to 300 DPI. It doesn't affect the resolution of the image, just affects how 2D applications kind of deal with that. Just wanted to let you know that, since we're talking about Boost for Daz. I think, this is all I have. If you guys don't have any questions, I think I'm going to say goodbye and good night. Any other questions? I can totally take them right now. I'm just going to go and see if I can turn this into something renderable with like tons of particles. Where's our concentric parallax backgrounds here? I think I've overdone it with the particles a little bit, huh? Also, maybe on the camera front, let's go and turn, oops, camera, here we go. Make the f-stop a little bit lower. Yeah, so Matty's particles, Kindred Arts particles, you can make your own particles. You can, if you use Matty's particles, you can use Ultrascatter to change them. You can also use other materials on that. Hours of fun. Have a look at it, and it's just so cool to have to do this with planes and small objects rather than with fully built scenes. Your GPU will thank you, your sanity and your render speed will all thank you. And of course, the transmission speed to something like Boost for Daz will also thank you. That would be cool, Tug. That is a really cool high note to end on. Let's do that. Let's animate him with Puppeteer. If you guys don't know Puppeteer, it is seriously insane. Let's go and save the scene. So Puppeteer is one of my favorite tools. Let me just go and create a brand new scene for that. If you want to see the tree giant dance, we can make that happen. Let me go and bring in a new scene. I'll go and just use my single viewport and show you something that I just cannot get enough of. And you can use this for anything from expressions to poses. It is wonderful to use Puppeteer. If you haven't played with it, do play with it, please. I'll go bring in my tree giant. And in this bundle here, the tree giant mega bundle, exactly, Camilla. In this tree giant mega bundle, you get all these poses. And we don't really know which pose is a good one, so we'll go and give them several and go into poses. Tree giant poses, there we go. And I'll just go and give him maybe some of the standing poses. We'll start with this one here. Righty, that's a good pose. And I've got my Puppeteer tab here already. If you don't have that, go and open it under Window, Panes, Puppeteer. And this is essentially now in edit mode. And that's kind of the mode that we need to put some poses onto this two-dimensional blend space. That's really what it is. So just put it anywhere, like here, just left click on there when you're in edit mode. Pick another pose. So maybe nothing standing, but nothing sitting, but anything standing, like this is good. We'll go just left click that on here. That's another good pose. Put that on here. And so every of these little dots now equates to a pose. And if I left click on them, then Daz Studio goes there. And the cool thing is that we can now go, maybe just have this one here. That's also cool. We'll go and put that underneath here. And maybe have this one as well. Put that here. And then maybe have this guy here throwing. Woo! Very cool. So now we have all these poses here on the side. In edit mode, you create them, but in preview mode, if you switch over to that, your left clicks do something very different. So watch the King of the Forest here dance. If you left click into this and then left click and drag, you can see that it interpolates from one pose to the other. And that is just so cool because it interpolates between all these poses. So that lets you go and literally go and either make him dance, or you can find the perfect pose with this as well. Works with expressions as well. It has layers too. If you didn't know this feature in Daz Studio, this is insane and needs to be explored. So you can literally make him, like, you know, go from a sitting position in a standing position or whatnot. If you wanted to amend something, like maybe this pose, here's a sitting pose, I didn't quite see that, you can go back into edit mode and then just go click on that pose, right click on it and say delete. And then we don't have it in that blend space anymore. Maybe we're going to use something else. Maybe him attacking. That's cool as well. Let's go and put that in instead. And then in the preview mode, you can use this. If you go into recording mode, that's essentially the same as preview mode, but the timeline will play and record your motions as you do that. Seriously, seriously cool. Yes, Puppeteer is free and comes with Daz Studio. It's completely built in. It's completely free. It's such an underutilized tool because so it works in layers as well. You can use it on a per person basis, but you can also use it in layers. So you can go and create yourself another layer on here. Then you have another tab. So this is like where it says layer 1. You can go and in edit mode, I think you can somehow rename this, rename layer. So if we say this one is kind of my pose, then you could have another layer, like add layer, and you can say this is your expression. Then you have 2 between which you can switch, so you can adjust different values independently from one another. So I can go, I don't think he has expressions, but on a person you could now dial in various expressions and then make your character basically talk like that. Very cool. And you can adjust that independently of the pose that your character strikes. So very, very cool. It basically works for every parameter. Think of this as a timeline that doesn't have time attached to it. So whereas the timeline can interpolate between multiple values, it does so only when you hit play. This thing does it when you just move the mouse, so it takes time out of the equation. And it's powerful because it means you can have if you can't decide which pose is best, either this one or that one, maybe you just want something in between, you know, you just go and pick whatever you need. Save it out as a new pose preset as well. That also works. And go and make terrific renders with that. If you animate this in time with the music, you make him dance. Add some good camera animation to it, and you're going to be hit on Instagram, I'm telling you. And then save as any block. Absolutely, that is also possible. Is that cool or what? Yes, Puppeteer, play with it, play with it. You're going to have so much fun with it. My friends, I'm going to go say goodbye and good night. If you do have any questions and you're not watching this live, if you're one of those people who watches the recording, which I totally understand, don't be shy. Leave some comments below, and if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. My friends, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for 69 likes. That is a lot of likes on a live stream. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be back in 4 weeks with another funky Daz in the studio with Daz 3D live stream, and in about 2 weeks we're going to do a Daz Plus live stream only for Daz Plus subscribers. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you hopefully next time. Take care. Bye bye.